parts, it is of course quite straightforward, most of the parts. So velocity gradient tensor, first of all, so let us just see. I will not waste time by calculating individual terms, but let us just see them one by one. So velocity gradient is basically this one. So when you want to give an answer to the velocity gradient tensor, it is systematic if that is given in a matrix form. So the first row, that is I equal to 1. So you have all the derivatives of u. Second row is I equal to 2. So you have all the derivatives of v. And the third row is for w. This is very straightforward. So this is very straightforward, and I am not getting into that because you have u, v, and w. It's a matter of simple partial differentiation. The angular velocity, that is the question number 2. That is also quite straightforward. So you have the different expressions for this angular velocity components along x, y, z. Just use those. I mean, there is nothing great in that. Or you can simply find the curl of the velocity and multiply that with half. That will give a direct vector based solution of the same problem. Then the rate of strains along x, y, and z. So rate of strains along x, y, and z are these ones. So this is you may call it half of epsilon dot xx, because that will be this one. Similarly, so this is important. What's the name, whether A, E, or epsilon, that is not important, but this is the rate of strain along x. Similarly, along y is this one, and along z is. Then the fourth question, the rate of change of angle between two elements dx and dy is your alpha dot plus beta dot. So the question number 4 will be this one. So up to question number 4, it is quite a straightforward application of the formula that we have derived for various kinematic components. But question number 5 is something which we may have to dig into more conceptually and then try to get a solution to the problem. So first of all, that what is considered to be a principal one, or in any concept in, say, deformation, stress or strain, what is principal stress or principal strain? So to understand that, we have to relate it with the mathematical concept of eigenvalue and eigenvector. Now this is, the toughest aspect of learning all these subjects, that eigenvector and eigenvalue, all of you have been knowing over the years by virtue of your vector algebra education. And principal stress, principal strain, these are the things also you have heard in your earlier courses in mechanics. But how do you relate those two, except for the fact that you are given a formula of how to calculate principal stress, etc. So to bridge that gap, you have to have a physical understanding of what is the meaning of eigenvalue and eigenvector. So let us say that you have some matrix A. Example, I mean, just to give you a physical example, let us say it is 3 by 3. This is example, it need not be 3 by 3. Why I am giving 3 by 3 is because you can relate it with all the second order tensors that we talk about in the physical purview of kinematics of. So let us say this is A. Now let us say there is a vector x. Physically, how it looks, I mean, not physically, I mean, if you write it in a expanded form. So how it looks, I will just give you a look so that you will be able to follow it better. So you have A. Its components are A11, A12, A13, A21, A22, A23, A31, A32, and A33. And X is a vector. So it is having its components x1, x2, x3. So this is 3 by 3. This is 3 by 1. So what will be the product? Product will be 3 by 1. That means 3 rows and 1 column. So something like this one. So by virtue of calculating this or doing this matrix multiplication, what you have done is you have transformed this 3 by 3 matrix by doing this product to a vector. So it's a 3 by 1 vector. Say the name of this vector is y. So you will have this y1, y2, y. Let us give name y. It is okay. Just a name. So in a way, you have applied a transformation. This matrix can also be perceived as a transformation because, say, any kind of transformation, say rotation, reflection, translation can be expressed as a transformation in terms of a matrix like 3 by 3 matrix. So let us take an example of rotation. So if you so in this way, it is possible to have an axis, have a direction like this. See, physically, what are these? If you have components of a vector, so you can imagine this like a coordinate. So you have say x1, x2, x3. These are like x, y, z component, and you have the origin which is 0, 0, 0. So in a way, this can physically specify a direction. And if this is a rotation matrix, as an example, then the rotation matrix will tell you that this vector goes to a new location y1, y2, y3 by a rotation, physical rotation. That is what it is telling. So all in all, if you forget about rotation and apply it as a or consider it as a generalized transformation, it is transforming or it is applying a transformation in a way that this entire thing is transformed finally. That means the combination of this is being transformed to a vector. This final culmination. Now sometimes this vector y could be just scale of this vector x. That means if this is the vector x direction, y is aligned in the same way along x with some either stretching or contraction. It could be less than x, equal to x, or greater than x. So whatever is that stretching factor, if we call it lambda, then we can write y1 as lambda x1, y2 as lambda x2, y3 as lambda x3. Lambda could be less than 1 or greater than 1. If greater than 1, it is stretching, and less than 1 is contraction. So we, in a very special case, when this operator operating on a vector is returning everything which is aligned or oriented in the same direction of this vector itself, then you can write it in this form. And then this is called as eigenvalue. So what the eigenvalue does is that it culminates everything in the form of a parameter which can be expressed in terms of a single vector. And what is that single vector here? So when you are talking about a strain, so the strain is expressed as a combination of what? As a combination of normal strain and shear strain. Just like stress has normal stress and shear stress, so strain will also have normal strain and shear strain. So this particular direction will talk about one of these, normal or shear. We will see what it is. To understand that, we will now give a physical sense to this matrix A. So far we have generalized it. So we will consider this as the rate of deformation. So let us say that this A is nothing but the rate of deformation. E11, Eij I have given definition. So that Eij I am talking about. So this we multiply by x1, x2, x3 is equal to, now you have lambda x1, lambda x2 and lambda x3. So let us now simplify this one. So E11 minus lambda E22 sorry E12 E13 E21 E22 minus lambda into E23 E31 E32 minus sorry E32 not minus. So what we have done is simply we have taken everything in the left hand side. We have done no, nothing more than that. Taken everything in the left hand side. So now you have a system of equations, and I will again try to give you a physical or rather conceptual understanding of this before coming to that what is the implication of this. All of you may recall or even if you may not recall, if I tell you will be recalling that for non-trivial solution, determinant of this one, whatever is the matrix, that has to be 0. Now why it is so and how it is relevant to this physical problem, that is more important rather than learning it as a formula. So learning it as a formula is a very dangerous thing, where you know how to solve the problem, but you really do not know what it is and why you are talking about that. So let us delve into that. So let us say that you have a say this as a system of algebraic equations. So you have something into x1, that is this is that something, plus something into x2, which is this something, plus something into x3, this is equal to 0. Similarly, the second row will give something into x1, that is this one, plus something into x2 plus something into x3 equal to 0. And the third row will give a similar type. Okay. So once you have these, one of the solutions which by closing the eye you can tell doing nothing is x1 equal to 0, x2 equal to 0 and x3 equal to 0. This is the so-called trivial solution. So what is this trivial solution? The trivial solution is this vector becomes the origin itself. I mean, it has no significance as a vector because it is just 0, 0, 0. So what has a physical significance is that you have a non-zero value of this. So when do you have a non-zero value of this? To understand that, let me give you a 2 by 2 example instead of 3 by 3, which is more intuitive and physical to follow. Let us say that I have an equation. I'm just giving an example. Say 2x1 plus 3x2 is equal to 0 and 5x1 plus 7x2 equal to 0. Right? So what solution do you get out of this? Only x1 equal to 0, x2 equal to 0. So only you have a trivial solution. Instead of this, let us say 2x1 plus 3x2 is equal to 0. And 4x1 plus 6x2 equal to 0. So from your understanding in basic coordinate geometry, you know that both of these represent the equation of the same straight line. Okay, both of these represent the equation of the same straight line, maybe something like this. So if both of them represent the equation of the same straight line, that means although you have two equations in phase, but these are not really, linearly independent equations. They are essentially the same equations, and in fact, this is just a scalar multiplier of the other. That is why it is the same straight line, and therefore you will have infinite number of the solutions. So infinite number of solutions will come by virtue of the fact that any point on this straight line is a solution. Right? 2x1 plus 3x2 equal to 0. Second equation is also 2x1 plus 3x2 equal to 0. We have just written it by a scalar multiplier. And therefore, if you really want a solution, any point on these lines is the solution. So, we have infinite number of solutions. But the good thing is that all these infinite number of solutions are non-trivial solutions except the 0, 0, 1. So the hallmark of this is that if you now put the coefficients in determinant form, you have 2, 3 and 4, 6. And this 4, 6 is actually the 2 into 2 into 3. And once you have one row as a scalar multiplier of another row, you will have the same thing, and the determinant will be 0. Right? So the determinant of the coefficient matrix equal to 0 is a hallmark of a non-trivial solution, so that you will get a non-trivial direction vector, that is from 0, 0, 0 to point x1, x2, x3. So that you will get. You may get several such of these, but you will get at least one. Okay. So therefore, coming back to our physical problem, to get the non-trivial x1, x2, x3 out of the rate of deformation tensor, we must have, for the non-trivial x1, x2, x3 combination, you must have determinant of E11 minus lambda E21, E22 minus lambda, and E23, E31, E32, and E33 minus lambda. This is equal to 0. So this is what is for the non-trivial solution. That is non-trivial vector x. So if you have that non-trivial solution, it will give rise to, you can see from here, if you multiply all this, you will get a cubic equation in lambda. So something into lambda cube plus whatever. So a cubic equation in lambda. So these three, you will get 3 roots of this cubic equation. So this shows that not for all cases you will get the non-trivial solution. You will get the non-trivial solution only for certain values of lambda for which this is satisfied. So those values of lambda are called as eigenvalue. And for each of these, so you get 3 values of lambda, lambda 1, lambda 2, lambda 3. So for these 3 values of lambda, you will get 3 different sets of this x. So x1, x2, x3, say superscript 1, x1, x2, x3 with superscript 2 and x1 x1, x2, x3 with superscript 3. So you will get 3 vectors which will make it non-trivial, and those correspond to 3 different eigenvalues. So what is the hallmark of these 3 vectors? By these 3 vectors, you have represented a unique directionality of representation of this rate of deformation. So if you have a unique directionality of the rate of deformation, what it means is that you have all the rate of deformation expressed in the form of normal strain. So the normal strain is this one, the direction of this from origin to x1, x2, x3, whatever, this one, any of these. So if you identify these directions, along that directions you will have only normal strain and no shear strain. So the concept of normal and shear strain or stress, it very much depends on the direction of the plane that you are talking about. So if you have a plane like this, which has a normal this one, then in this particular plane, with respect to this particular plane, all strains will appear to be normal strains and there will be no shear strain. So these will be like shear free planes. So physically you can start with a horizontal plane and maybe with respect to the origin you can start rotating the plane. For certain configure or orientations of the plane, when the normal directions are either of these, all the strains or deformations in the plane will culminate to normal strain and there will be no shear strain with respect to those planes. And that is what is the physical meaning of these eigenvalues and eigenvectors on the corresponding strains which are normal strain rates are called as principal strain rates, because if you now find out the corresponding strain rates with respect to this plane, you will get only the normal strain rates, and the directions are these ones. I mean, the 3 examples that we talked about. So this gives a physical picture. I mean, see, at the end I could have given you one sentence answer that question number 5, you have to just find out the eigenvalue and eigenvector for the rate of deformation tensor expressed in a matrix form. So that is how to solve a problem like the JEE coaching. But if you do not get any insight of why that is required to solve this problem, I am afraid you have developed no understanding of the subject. You only know how to crack exam, and that is important up to the competitive entrance exam level, but that doesn't give you any education of any what. So this is what is very, very important to understand. I will give you a final example of angular deformation which is related to the rate of deformation, and this example I want to give because this is what is the first example of angular deformation that you have learned in your first level of fluid mechanics course in the undergraduate level. So in the undergraduate level, if somebody has asked you that what is Newton's law of viscosity, so almost 90% of you who have earlier gone through an engineering fluid mechanics course we'll say, I mean, the best possible generalization is shear stress is proportional to the rate of shear strain. Right? Although we are talking about kinematics, I'm not talking about the stress here, but I just want to relate with why this is important in the context of what you have already learned earlier and what you will learn in future. So rate of shear strain. So now this rate of shear strain, the kinematics will give us a lesson of how to express that in special cases and in general cases. So far as the notation of that undergraduate fluid mechanics course will go, if you replace the proportionality with the inequality, you will get this one, right? This is the so-called Newton's law of viscosity. So you can relate that very much the velocity, the cross gradients of velocity that we are talking about here is somehow reflective in this term, but this term is not same as this term, right? I mean, had we expressed this for xy plane, it would simply be right, this one. This is the rate of deformation in the xy plane. So where has this gone in this what we have learned in the first course of fluid mechanics? So if you see what has been taught in the first course of fluid mechanics is a special example. See, this is why books are incomplete. They will never write it as a special example. It's a unidirectional flow. Unidirectional flow will have only one velocity component u, which in this case, the example that we are talking about is a function of y. So when you have a fluid element like this and the motion is only along x and there is no motion along y, so what will happen is that let us say this is on the solid surface. So this is grounded here. It is not moving. So this element will because of u, it will move to a new location, which over a period of time. So if this is 0, this is the this is the boundary. I'm just talking about a fluid element on the boundary. This is a small delta y. So here the x component of velocity will be 0 plus a small delta u. So over a period of time, it will move by delta u into delta t. So what is this small angle? Say, let me put up some color here. So delta theta. So you have tan of delta theta is delta u into delta t by delta y. So as these are small times and small delta y, so delta theta is also small. So this is as good as delta theta, and you divide it by delta t. So this is this. So if you take the limit as delta t tends to 0, this is your theta dot, and this is nothing but du dy. So that is where this has become the rate of deformation. So this considers unidirectional flow. Okay. So the unidirectional flow is a basic assumption of writing this as a rate of deformation. But when that assumption is withdrawn, this is the more generic way of writing the rate of deformation so far as shear deformation goes. This is a little bit of disconnect between what the first level of fluid mechanics you have learned and what you are learning here. So we'll stop here today, and in the next class we will continue with this, and we'll learn how to describe vortex flows. Vortex flows are strong rotations in the flow. For example, if you have a tornado or a cyclone, major calamity in the atmosphere, or even if you see water coming out of draining out of your kitchen sink, these are two very common experiences in human life and nature to see vortices or rotational elements in the flow. In the next class, we will see that how we mathematically can characterize the kinematics of such vortex flows. So let us stop the presentation or stop sharing the. Am I audible?
Good morning, sir.
Good morning, sir.
Morning, sir. Yes, sir.
Good morning. So we will get started. I am sorry, previous meeting was stretching for some more time, but anyway, we have sufficient time to discuss about the matter today. So let us get started. I will upload the writing pad and we will move forward. Can you see my writing board?
Yes, sir.
Okay. So let us briefly recapitulate what we were doing last time. So there was a rectangular element of fluid, and we were trying to get a picture of how this angle, which is originally 90 degree, for example, gets changed because of deformation in the flow. So these two sides, if we draw them like this, after deformation, let us say that these have come like this way. So the angle between them, which was 90 degree, have now changed. And the change we have measured by some angles, delta alpha and delta beta, where you have alpha dot, that is the rate at which the alpha is changing. This is partial derivative of v with respect to x, and beta dot is partial derivative of u with respect to y. So this much I, so far as I remember, we did last time. Now, conceptually, the first thing that we have to understand is that these are the physical pictures of the angular motion of some line elements, but lines are not the elements which will hallmark a volume of a fluid, because in fluid, if you draw a line, it is your imagination, but fluid is actually being manifested in the form of a volume. So in that way, the lines are only representatives, and these are therefore not sufficient to give you a quantitative description of the shear deformation and the angular velocity of flow until and unless you define them forcefully by some definition which has a logical sense. So in that way, the rate of shear deformation. How we defined it? We defined it as the average of the rate of change of angle of the two line elements between two line elements. I mean, which were originally 90 degree. Now there is a change, and what is that rate of change on an average? And this averaging is required because different line elements have different angular motion. This is very, very important. Not like a rigid body where everything has same angular motion. So different line elements will have different angular motion. So to standardize this, you take any two line elements which were originally orthogonal and find their average. This is how it is defined forcefully. So that becomes, and in terms of angular velocity, this is again the average of the angular velocities of two line elements that were originally perpendicular. Again, the spirit of the definition is very similar, that because you do not have a rigid body type of motion in a fluid, you can identify two line elements which were originally at an angle 90 degree, find their respective angular velocities and then average it out. So this will be half of this one. First along x and then along y. See, I mean, I will tell you certain things which is very, very important. So first of all, when we talk about the angular velocity, normally we take this half intrinsically, but when we take the shear deformation, this half we do not intrinsically take to begin with. I mean, this half we will include at the end. But if you see the original definition that is being put forward, there is no question of averaging, because what it simply says is that the rate of change of the angle between two line elements that were originally 90 degrees. So this half will not come in the definition of rate of deformation directly, but we will see that, I mean, if we try to find out a generalized velocity gradient where this half factor may appear as mathematically, and how we put it up in the form of a physical or a mathematical definition. It is the rate of this shear deformation. That is how we put it in this way, or rate of better to say rate of strain. So this half factor, whether we will keep or not keep in some description, will depend on, now that we have got a physical concept. See, this half physically doesn't matter. Physically what matters is this one. So we have a deformation change in angle here, we have a change in angle here, and those are reflected by the change which was originally 90 degree. Now the change is because of this rate, irrespective of the half factor. Angular velocity, the half factor is more straightforward because we are just averaging the angular velocities of two, the line elements. Rate of shear deformation, actually we are not averaging anything, and in that way this half factor we will leave apart right now, but we will see how it will come up naturally as a part of a mathematical description. So now, so these instead of rate of shear deformation, we will say this rate of shear strain or whatever. This is strain rate of this fluid element. And this is in which plane we have to keep in mind. This is XY plane. So XY plane means whatever angular thing is happening, this is with respect to Z axis. So now, if we give certain indices, say 1 for X, 2 for Y, and 3 for Z, and U1 means U, U2 means V, and U3 means W, then we are able to write this particular expression. In place of V, we will write U2. In place of X, we will write X1. In place of U, we will write U1. And in place of Y, we will write X2. So in that way, this is talking about the deformation in the 1-2 plane, right? 1-2 plane. And what particularly the rate of strain. So strain we normally give epsilon in mechanics. So rate means epsilon dot. In which plane? 1-2. So see this rate of strain. It depends on two indices. So if we generalize it in an act of generalizing this, now if we write epsilon dot ij. So see, this is 1 and this is 1, and this 2 comes here. So it's a cross derivative. So this is simply so now I have put up a mathematical generalization of what physically we studied in the XY plane. It's just a mathematical generalization. I have replaced the indices with instead of 1 to ij, so that we can apply it to other planes also. In all other planes, similar things will happen. So in place of ij, you can put 1, 2, 3, anything, and you will get the picture in the relevant planes. Now, I will try to rationalize that half factor. See, if we want to apply this definition, not just for angular motion, I is not equal to j, or angular deformation, case is I not equal to j. But for linear deformation, also if you want to apply it, say I equal to j, then what will be that epsilon ii? Just if you put I equal to j, it will be simply 2 into this one. But from our mathematical formula of the linear strain rate, we have seen that it is actually only this this one, right? Recall that epsilon dot xx is partial derivative of u with respect to x. Just look into the derivations of the change in length and change in volume. You will see that derivation that I have done in the class. So this 2 factor is not there. So to get rid of that 2 factor, we can define something artificially in a mathematical way to make it inclusive of even the linear deformation. And angular deformation anyway is an artificial definition. So whether we put half or not, it is artificial. Linear is not artificial because linear is the physically what is there. The angular is artificial because we are defining it on the basis of some definition that we give. So instead of this epsilon dot, we use a different symbol. This E dot, just to distinguish between these two. So this is half of this this one. So this is called as rate of deformation tensor. Now where the tensor thing comes, I will tell you. So tensor, I mean, we will come across this this mathematical picture of tensor so many times when we will discuss fluid mechanics in a mathematical way. I do not want to stress upon its mathematical foundation too much. In a very light note, I mean, one of our teachers in undergraduate course, when we asked the teacher that what is a tensor, I mean, maybe formally or informally, because these things are coming in the mathematical description. The first thing that he told is that tensor is something that is creating tension in the mind of a student. So why it is perceived to be so is because we try to be very abstract and try to be very mathematical, and in that way the mathematical definition of tensor is very involved. I will try to give you a physical picture specifically relevant to what we are talking about here, and then you will appreciate more. So imagine that when we are talking about a velocity, we write ui, right? I equal to 1 is velocity along x, I equal to 2 is velocity along y, etc. So that means, what is this I? I is an index specifying the component. Of course, in a cylindrical polar coordinate or any other coordinate system, this kind of Cartesian index you cannot use. You use other indices, but this Cartesian index is a way of showing the components, at least in the Cartesian coordinate. So this one index is a hallmark of a vector, because the vector will have their components along different directions are given by the different indices. Now when you have this thing, it has two indices. One index is, of course, it is like a vector, but another index which makes it a bit more general than a vector. So having a larger number of indices is not just the hallmark of something more general than a vector. There are several other properties that have to be satisfied, and when we will get more physical examples, we will talk about that in more concrete physical and mathematical terms. This is just one example, so with one example we should not try to generalize. But the important message that I want to give out of here is that now you have a sort of a description. First of all, in simple mathematical foundation, all of you are familiar with matrix algebra. So in matrix algebra, in a matrix form, you can write using two indices for the matrices, right? So here you can write it in a matrix form. So I is 1, 2, 3 and j is 1, 2, 3. So you can write all these components in a 3 by 3 matrix form with 3 rows and 3 columns. So when you have these 3 rows and 3 columns like this, so I will be from 1 to 3 and j will be from 1 to 3. So in that way, you can write it in a matrix form, but each of the rows of this matrix is like a vector. In fact, each of the columns of the matrix is also like a vector, because each row and each column will have 3 independent components. In mathematical term, a vector is an n-dimensional row or a column. So here you have 3 because it is physical, right? You have 3 physical directions. But if you want to generalize, instead of 3 rows, you could have n number of rows. That is called as an n-dimensional vector, where you have n components could be presented in the form of a matrix or a row matrix with n columns, or a column matrix with n rows. So in that way, a single row or a single column is one of the ways of matrix representation of a vector. Physical, 3 dimensions. Mathematical could be up to n dimension, n can be anything. Physical, therefore, is a subset of the mathematical picture. When you have these 2 indices, you see that the row column structure is broken and you have a matrix representation. So we can understand that this is something which is built up from the concept of a vector, but it is something more general than a vector. So because you require 2 indices to describe that, we call it a second order tensor. So one of the learnings from here is that a tensor may have different orders. So question is, what is the first order tensor? What is the 0th order tensor? So from it is clear that 0th order, just from intuitive understanding. See, any understanding will have an intuitive component and will have a formal component, and that combination is our learning. So the intuitive component, and which is very much correct, is that 0th order means it will have no indices. So it's like a scalar, like pressure, temperature, etc. The first order is requiring 1 index, so it's a vector. Second order is this one. It requires 2 indices. So in that way, you could have n number of indices to have an nth order tensor. But nth order tensor in general is mathematically maybe relevant, but physically not interesting. In this fluid mechanics course, we will see the physical relevance of up to a 4th order tensor. We will give more examples of second order tensors, and just having 2 indices is not sufficient, because these 2 indices you are able to express only in a Cartesian framework. In a non-Cartesian framework, these kinds of indices will be gone, but you may have a different representation where these 2 indices will not directly come. So what will hallmark a second order tensor is not just 2 Cartesian index in a Cartesian reference frame or a Cartesian description, but something a bit more mathematically robust than that, and we will come into that when we will discuss stress as a tensor, second order tensor. But at least you can understand that this is a second order tensor because it is more general than a vector, which is the first order tensor, and it requires 2 indices for its specification. Let us keep this understanding up to this level for the time being, and we will expand this horizon of understanding as we will learn more examples of this second order tensor. Now, similarly, the angular velocity. So angular velocity, let us also write it in the symbolic form. So first of all, so angular velocity in the, say, when we wrote the angular velocity in the xy plane, it is as good as angular velocity with respect to the z axis. So what was that? Half of this one. So now from this pattern of writing, see this is a very important skill. Pattern of writing is an aptitude test. It has nothing to do with great mathematical understanding. So if this is the angular velocity with respect to the z axis, and this we have derived, you could easily write simply by the pattern of the expression that what could be the angular velocities with respect to the x and y. So let us try to do that. I will show you the mental logic that we apply to write it, so that you will never have to actually memorize this. So see here, you have z as the axis. So the 2 things have appeared at the bottom is x and y. But first is x and then y. This first and second is important not for the rate of deformation term, but for angular velocity, because there is a minus sign. So which one will be plus and which one will be minus, that is important. So for that you consider the triad x, y, z. So let us just erase it and write it more clearly. So let us say we have X, then Y, then Z. And we are just, traversing a anti-clockwise rotation, because the positive and the negative sense of the Cartesian axis is a right-handed system. That means physically, if you have a right-handed screw which you rotate from X to Y, so this is X and this is Y. If you have a right-handed screw which you rotate from X to Y, that is anti-clockwise direction, the screw will axially move. The axial direction in which it will move is the Z direction, positive Z direction. So that is this one. Okay, so that is how these triads are formed. So you have this. So when you have Z, you have first X and then Y. So when you have X here, you should have, according to this triad, first Y and then Z. So let me write here. And once you have written this one, it will be the cross component of velocity. That means Y will be associated with W and Z will be associated with V. Let us write another one. So in this triad, see, Y follows first Z and then X. If you see this, traversing anti-clockwise. So first Z and then X. So you can see, just by simple pattern logic, we are able to write this. In fact, you can do these derivations by replacing xy with say yz and zx. You will see these ones. But this is a simple, pattern-based way of writing this. So the angular velocity vector is nothing but so this is angular velocity. Simply the vector sum of the angular velocities with respect to the axis. Now we can look into it from a different pure mathematical framework, which will make it again independent of the coordinate system. See, so far we have written a description which is dependent on the coordinate system, and every time what we are doing conceptually is we are starting with a coordinate system dependent description to make it visually understandable, conceptually understandable, and we are then trying to make it more generalized and abstract. So in an effort to do that, let us find out the curl of the velocity vector v. So curl of a vector, if you put the determinant description, so you write there this one and the components of this one. We have just used the determinant definition of curl of a vector, nothing more than that. So now let us calculate this and see what we get out of this. So first this and then calculation of this determinant. J, then with this one. And then K. So you will see that it is clearly, and if we just highlight it with a different color. So this is what this is twice of angular velocity along x. Similarly, with this absorbed minus sign and this one, this will be twice of angular velocity along y, and this will be twice of angular velocity along z. So this, summarily, you can say that this is nothing but 2 into the angular velocity vector. And see, now we have been in a position to express this independent of a coordinate system. The angular velocity, it is the half of the curl of a vector. Now curl, you can, it's a vector operation, you can apply any coordinate system based description to do that. So this is the curl of the velocity vector, and in fact this is called as a vorticity vector. So when you do a mathematics course, they will teach you about the vorticity as the curl of a velocity. So this is what is the physical interpretation of the vorticity. Instead of starting with a definition, I have started with the physical example of rotation, and I have shown you that how that physical example of rotation merges with the mathematical description of curl of a vector. So we have described the deformation, which includes linear, angular, and rotation. Rotation is not deformation; it's simply a angular, almost like a rigid body movement, and the deformation includes linear or angular. So now, if we can see a commonality in all these expressions, see we have seen so many expressions for angular motion, linear motion, and rate of angular deformation, rate of linear deformation, so many things. What is the commonality in all this? The commonality in all these is that in every term of the expressions, you have something in the most generic form like this. Some velocity component partially differentiated with some coordinate component. You put different values of I and j and add or subtract them, you will get expressions for all the kinematic parameters related to motion that we have talked about. So this is the most general hallmark of how to describe the kinematics of flow based on the velocity and its respective partial derivatives with respect to position. See, time derivative is not coming here. So in a way, this is the most general depiction of any kind of kinematic motion in the fluid in terms of the rate of motion, not the motion itself. So we call it as a velocity gradient tensor. So velocity gradient tensor is something which is again, I mean, it's a mathematical quantity. You can see two indices I and j are there, so it's a second order tensor. Absolutely clear about it. So now I will just connect a very interesting mathematical concept that all of you know with something very physical. This connect you may not have gone through in your earlier way of understanding the concept. So when you write this this one, Now, when we write this, you may argue that what is the great thing in writing this. So, I mean, let us see exactly what I have written. So, what I have written is simply A is equal to half of A plus B plus half of A minus B. Somebody who is in the first lesson of algebra in class 7 will understand this. So that obviousness in this identity is very clear, but the linkage between this mathematical foundation of fluid mechanics and physical foundation of fluid mechanics is something that we will discuss in this context. See, A and B, they are simple algebraic expressions. You know, I mean, their implication. Let us say that A and B are matrices, and very special matrices where B is A transpose. This is an example. B could be anything. So if B is A transpose, what is different between A and B is the swap of row and column, right? The transpose of a matrix means row and column will be swapped. So here, if this is a matrix, this is actually its transpose, right? Because the row and column, they are swapped. So this is like, you know, half of, so if you call it, this velocity gradient tensor, if you just give it a name, say A, so then this is half of, A plus A transpose plus half of A minus A transpose. And if you recall one of your early lessons in matrix algebra, that every matrix can be written as a sum of a symmetric and a skew symmetric matrix. So here, that is what we are trying to write and describe it physically. So this is symmetric and this is skew symmetric. Instead of matrix, we will call it tensor, just to give it a generality. But matrix is one way of describing the components of the tensor when you write it formally. So just for your understanding, you can consider these to be equivalent so far as the second order is concerned. The matrix tensor equivalence is lost when it is not a second order, but equivalence you can keep in mind. So that all the well-known theories of matrix algebra will apply for the tensor algebra for tensor of second order. So why symmetric? Because if you swap I and j, it will remain the same, right? This expression doesn't change. Why skew symmetric? If you swap I and j, this will become the negative of what it was. So that is why it is skew symmetric. Now the physical meaning. This symmetric has a physical implication of deformation. Linear, angular, whatever, deformation. And this skew symmetric has a physical implication of rotation. You can now connect that with the expressions for angular motion and the linear one that we have developed. Out of that, the linear, angular, volumetric, all sorts of deformation we can fit into this part. And the rotation, which is like a rigid body type, is segregated by this. So in this way, you have described the rate of the velocity gradient tensor as a linear superposition of deformation and rotation. Out of that, deformation is something which is actually related to shear force and volumetric force, etc. So that is something which is strongly linked with the stress-strain relationship that we will require for the dynamics, for describing the dynamics of viscous flows. whereas this one is not linked with the stress strain relationship because this is simply a rotation. Now you might argue that the rotation concept was also applied to a deforming fluid, right? So how do you say that this is not related to the deformation? So we can abstract it from deformation by noting that how did we define it? So this we define it by half of alpha dot minus beta dot, right? So this was alpha dot and this was beta dot. Now, when does this in a limiting sense approach a rigid body motion? So rigid body motion is a case where you have alpha dot is equal to minus beta dot. That means the entire thing. See, I mean this 90-degree fitted two axes, they will rotate in the anti-clockwise direction by alpha dot. That is the rigid body motion. So that means beta dot will become alpha dot. So for rigid body motion, this will be half of 2 alpha dot. That means alpha dot. That means everything will move in the angular velocity alpha dot. So in a limiting sense, this expression asymptotically approaches the expression for rotation of a rigid body. If the fluid in a limiting sense behaves like a rigid body, and therefore that may be isolated from the deformation concept, and that is what it is trying to say. So let us do one thing. Since we have discussed all these concepts, let us put up a problem. I will give you a little time to work on this problem, and then I will discuss the different aspects of the problem. The problem is, of course, more or less by using the formula that we have discussed so far. Even if you do not know the derivations, you will be able to solve mostly the problem. But this is also important to get an idea of how these different things are calculated. So let us put up the problem. So you have a velocity field which is given by 3x square y I plus 2y square z j plus x square y square k. Something, I mean, this is very arbitrary. I've just given you so that you can do some mathematical practice with derivatives, etc. Do not try to confuse with the dimensions because these are not really. I mean, sometimes see this velocity is meter per second. You may immediately argue that these are meters, so how can the dimensions match? So the whole idea is that you put x, y as numbers expressed in some units, and overall you express it as a velocity unit. So in that way, this velocity field is described. So you have to write expressions for velocity gradient tensor, angular velocity, strain rate along x, y, z. These are all very important kinematic parameters. That is why I am saying. Rate of change of angle between elements dx and dy of a rectangular element of volume dx, dy, dz, and principal strain rate and their directions. Okay, so try to solve this problem. I will give you about, say, maybe a couple of minutes to think about how to solve this. Maybe you can also do some calculations. So after a couple of minutes, let us discuss about the solution of this problem and whether we can open up some new concepts through the solution of this problem.